Okay. If there's a doubt from the last class, go ahead, ask your doubts. Make it fast. I believe you have done the assignments. Hopefully. Have you? Huh? Turning off lights is not a problem. Don't ask me for popcorn. Okay. Yeah, if you have a doubt, please do ask. Industrial Revolution, the introduction of American Revolution. Okay then, we'll go ahead. I believe I've already given you the introduction. So we'll start with the prelude then. Prelude or introduction. As most of you know, during the age of discovery, Christopher Columbus, who was an Italian sailor, sponsored by Spain, reached Bahamas in the Caribbean around 1492. Which you already know, right? So accidentally, Columbus and in turn the Europeans had stumbled upon a new world, because the Europeans had no clue about the existence of the North and South American continents. So they called the territories to be New World. Caribbean archipelago. I hope you know. What is archipelago? Group of islands. And once this discovery had been made, other European sailors also ventured into the New World. One notable sailor was Amerigo Vespucci. Again, an Italian sponsored by different countries like Portugal and Spain. Between 1497 to 1504, over these 7 years, he visited the New World a few times. And eventually published his experiences in the New World in the form of pamphlets. So the publication of pamphlets by Amerigo Vespucci popularized the New World among the Europeans. So in his honor, in the honor of Amerigo Vespucci, the two continents had been named as North America and South America. Amerigo is the Italian name, America is the anglicized name. So New World had been named after Amerigo Vespucci. When these Europeans ventured into the New World, you should not think that the New World was a barren land, it was devoid of people. In fact, there had been hundreds of different tribal groups living in the New World. For example, the North American continent itself had close to 600 different tribal groups living there. So, who were the different tribes living in the New World? There are tribal groups like Apache, Blackfoot, Cherokee, Inuits, Iroquois, Mayan, Miami, Mingo, Odawa. Different tribal groups had been living there. Whatever names came to my mind, I just wrote. And these tribal people had been given the common name Indians. You'd have heard about Red Indians in North America? So the common name for the tribal people had been Red Indians. Now, why did they go to the New World? Were they on an excursion? Initially, these were adventurous trips. Later, the Europeans tried to extract economic wealth from the New World. How did they do that? With the help of the tribal people did not willingly help the Europeans. The tribal people were enslaved. The Europeans established plantations and mines, agricultural plantations and mines, mining for precious metal. So the Europeans enslaved the native people of the Americas, and with their help they established plantations and mines.
So they were called Indians for the same reason that the Europeans had came to find India.
That is exactly the reason behind the name West Indies. Initially Columbus even thought he had reached India, only to realize later it wasn't the case. Are you getting it? But establishing plantations and mines with the help of the natives, that is the Indians, was not economically rewarding. Was not economically rewarding. Why? Nobody likes being enslaved, right? So when the natives are enslaved, they tried to escape from the plantations and mines. Could they escape? Yes, they could. Why? Because these natives were familiar with local geography. Their homeland, so natives are familiar with local geography. Indian cricket team plays better in Indian pitches, right? Same way natives are familiar with local geography, topography, climate, conditions, everything. Meaning they were familiar with the local routes and all. So these natives could easily escape. And after escaping, they could mix with the local population, which also had a similar appearance. I hope you're getting it.
By the local population, you mean
Tribal people. So who are the local population in North and South Americas? Tribal people. So natives, the enslaved tribals could escape from the plantations and mines and they could mix with the local people, meaning literally they could get lost among the locals. It was very difficult to identify and bring them back. Are you getting it? So the efforts started failing. European efforts started failing. Let's say the Europeans organized protection to the plantations and mines, prevented the escape of the native people, enslaved people. Even in that case, these tribal people, they lacked immunity. To most of the European diseases. Europeans had just entered the Americas, and naturally the tribal people lacked immunity to most of the European diseases. In fact, 90% of the tribal people died due to the lack of immunity. So 90% of the Native Americans died due to the lack of immunity. They did not intentionally bring the diseases. It was accidental. Yeah. Yes. Measles, smallpox. Huh? They did not have immunity, first of all. Lacked immunity, matlab they did not have immunity. When COVID came, did we have the immunity to COVID? Because it was a new strain of virus. So the viruses that were used to exist in Europe would have been new to the Americas. So naturally they lacked immunity and most of them died. That is why both the Americas even today have the native population to be a minority.
So it was also due to the harsh conditions of their, how they were kept.
That is different. Enslavement is not cordial. Enslavement does not suit you, any set of people. That is obvious. Harsh treatment and all punishments, that is normal. But people don't die because of that. You live under difficult conditions, but naturally you lack immunity, you die. That was the case. 90% of the natives died due to lack of immunity. But in the meantime, the Europeans had been working the plantations and the mines with the help of natives. But they had realized that enslaving natives and using them for productive purposes would not work out. So natives needed a new breed of slaves who could help them, Europeans needed a new breed of slaves who could help them in their economic activities. And so the Europeans started preferring black African slaves. Black African slaves. Now, why did they prefer black African slaves? These black African slaves had no knowledge of the Americas. They are not from America, they are from Africa. So they had no clue about the new continents. And they had a unique skin color. They were black skinned. Black African slaves had black colored skins, black colored complexion. So they could not easily escape and mix with the local people. Even if they wanted to run back to their countries, it was not possible. Why? We had Atlantic Ocean in between. 5,000 kilometers of ocean. And most importantly, these black African slaves historically had developed immunity to most of the European diseases. Now, how did they develop that immunity? Because the Europeans had already started venturing into the coastal areas of Africa during the age of discovery. So over hundreds of years, the black African slaves had developed immunity to most of the European diseases. So that is why the Europeans preferred black African slaves. Clear? Now let's say this was North America, Central America, and this was South America. On the other side you have Europe, you have countries like Britain and continents like Africa. Clear? Now let me explain the slave trade from the perspective of British, which we will discuss in detail later about the British venture. The Britishers had established 13 colonies along the eastern coast of North America, where they were also establishing plantations and mines, initially with the help of natives and later with the help of black people. So what did these plantations and mines produce? Agricultural commodities and precious metals, raw materials basically. So for example, let's say the Britishers, initially with the help of natives and later with the help of black people, produced raw materials, say cotton. So this raw material was exported to Britain from the plantations. Raw materials like cotton were exported to Britain. In the medieval industries of Britain, not the modern industries, in the medieval industries of Britain, these raw materials were converted into finished goods. So cotton, finished good would be textiles. So these textiles were sent to Africa and they were exchanged for slaves. But for that transaction to happen, you need slaves in Africa. Were slaves available in Africa? Yes. In fact, along the western coast of Africa, 4 different things were available in large quantities. Have you heard about an actress called Sunny Leone? All of you would have. She's an actress. There is a country called Sierra Leone along the western coast of Africa. So the territories around Sierra Leone, Togo, Benin, Niger, all these areas were famous for 4 things. Gigs, food grains, ivory, gold and slaves. So this is what you would have read yesterday. So draw this. Gigs, food grains, ivory matlab tusk of elephants, gold, slaves. Meaning there was a slave market along the western coast of Africa. How did the slaves come into being? Africa was a tribal continent, right? If one group of tribals defeated the other tribal group, they will enslave the defeated tribes and sell them. So the finished goods from Europe, in this case Britain, were exchanged for slaves, and the slaves were sent across the Caribbean to the British territories. Via Caribbean, they were sent to the British plantations. So what ocean do we have in between Europe and Atlantic Ocean? So if you combine all the transactions, right, they form a triangle. Raw materials, finished goods, slaves. That is why the phenomena came to be known as triangular or transatlantic Atlantic slave trade. Now I have told you this from the perspective of Britain. But the British people were not the only set of Europeans to venture into the Americas. Europeans from different countries had started settling in the Americas. For example, along the eastern coast of North America, this is eastern coast of North America, we had British settlements. Simultaneously, we had the French. Finished goods. Finished goods. Not only finished goods, other commodities are also there, weapons. So in North American continent, we had British along the eastern coast. We also had French. Even in South America, along the eastern coast of South America, there were French settlements like Guyana. Just write French, bus. Caribbean islands, right? Where are the Caribbean islands? Caribbean islands are here. Yeah. The French were also present in the Caribbean islands. So British, French. But the New World was literally dominated by the Spanish from the beginning. So North America we have Spanish. Central America was completely dominated by the Spanish. Spanish also had a formidable presence in South America. They were also seen in Caribbean. In addition to the Spanish, we also had the Portuguese in territories around Brazil. Brazil was colonized by the Portuguese. Dutch also had a minor presence. You know Dutch, right? Dutch were from Holland or Netherlands. Dutch were present in South America. They were also seen in the Caribbean. So every other country would have had a triangle. I have told you the British triangle. Portugal would have had a triangle. Spain would have had a triangle. Triangular slave trade. So when did triangular slave trade start? When did it start? It started around 16th century, early 16th century. It continued till early 19th century. Early 16th to early 19th century. So slave trade, transatlantic slave trade or triangular slave trade had been going on for roughly 300 years.
All other countries are also importing the slaves from there.
Obviously yes. Obviously yes. Because wherever the Europeans settled and colonized, they were not a numerical majority. Europeans were less in number compared to the native people. Even in the case of India, Europeans did not have a numerical advantage. So they needed workers, right? Which made them enslave the native people. Now as a result of this transatlantic slave trade that was going on for 300 years, about 12 to 13 million black Africans had become victims. More than 1 crore black Africans had become victims of the triangular slave trade. That is why both the North and South Americas even today have a fair share of black population. Clear? Which also implies the fact that there were three different groups of Europeans living in the New World, North and South Americas. Sorry, three different groups of people living in the New World. Who are the people? Who are the people living in the Americas? Natives. The tribal people are Indians. The Europeans, who are the colonists, and black African slaves who provided the workforce. Obviously, yes. Obviously. I included a tribe ka name na Mayans, South America. Irrespective of the source, this is what you would have read. See? British, French, brown color is Spanish. Central America, brown color, Spanish. South America, brown color, Spanish. Eastern side, green color, Portuguese, French, Dutch. Clear? Now, of all these European players who ventured into the Americas, Dutch had the most powerful navy. Dutch had the most powerful navy. So Dutch dominated the trade of the New World. Particularly, the Dutch people had been dominating the trade of North America. Dutch were also present in Caribbean, right? So Dutch had been dominating the trade of North America because of their naval power. But our concern is not the ventures of all the Europeans into the New World, but that of British. Because we are going to talk about American Revolution and American War of Independence. So, when does the British story start with respect to the Americas? Shall I? So, British venture into North America. There was a British king called James the First. James the First. He was the king of England from 1603 to 1625. British king. During his rule, the first British settlement in North America was established. In fact, the settlement was named after the king himself. It was called Jamestown. This happened in 1607. Now, this Jamestown was established along Atlantic coast, matlab eastern coast of North America. A small settlement. It was literally a slum. A few Europeans, Britishers went there, established a settlement. But later, as they established plantations and all around this Jamestown, economic activities started. Jamestown had grown into a larger settlement and eventually a colony. Colony is a larger settlement. So the first British colony in North America was, anybody? Virginia. So Jamestown, a small settlement, had grown into a larger colony called Virginia. Eventually, over a period of next 125 years, Britishers established 13 such colonies along the eastern coast of North America. So 13 colonies were established. First colony was Virginia. 12 more were established. The last British colony to be established was Georgia in 1732. So 1607 to 1732, Britishers had established 13 colonies along the eastern coast or Atlantic coast of North America. Meaning, these colonies are distributed from north to south along the eastern coast. Incidentally, Britishers also ventured into India in the same time frame. The agents of East India Company came to India around 1608 during the rule of Jahangir. You have heard about William Hawkins. Almost simultaneous colonization. Clear? Now, as economic activities increased in the colonies, more and more British people started settling. You can say from early 1600s to 1680s, 90% of the people who settled in the 13 colonies were of British origin. So in the first 80 years of colonization, 90% of the population in the colonies was British. That is why I told you the founding fathers of these colonies were British. Founding fathers of USA were British. I told you USA is one of the most successful capitalist countries in the world exactly because of that reason. Got it? But post 1680s, meaning after 1680s, a mixed European population started moving into the colonies. Why? Employment opportunities are available, businesses could be established. So after 1680s, a mixed European population from different European countries moved into the colonies. So that is the story of the 13 colonies getting established. So naturally you might have a question, what were those 13 colonies? I want you to be familiar with the names, at least a few of them. Let me give you the list of the 13 colonies. Write in the same order as I am writing, 3 rows. I am going to give you 3 sets of colonies. This is the first row. Leave some gap, one line ka spacing, and write the next set of colonies. I am writing here for the lack of space. So I've written the colonies in the geographical order, not in the chronological order, in the geographical order as they appear in the map. 4, 5, 4, 13 colonies. Of these colonies, you definitely have to remember Virginia, the first colony, Pennsylvania, New York, Massachusetts. Be familiar with the names, but the colonies that I've highlighted, you should not only be familiar, you should also remember the spelling of those colonies, names and spelling, particularly Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Virginia, New York. Whenever you come across such boring set of data, develop a story around such data so that you'll be able to remember the data. I've read this list only twice in my life. I've never forgotten the list till now. I created a story. No. I created the story when I was young, so the story might not be appropriate. What? Okay, I'll tell you what's the problem. When I read this list first time, there is no logic. There is no logic. The story was easy for me. It was able to make me remember the name, so I don't bother to remember the names now. New Hampshire, Massachusetts, I remember as a new suit, a new blazer. There is no logic. New Hampshire, Massachusetts. So I'm wearing a new blazer. New blazer. I am getting on the road, Rhode Island, because I want to connect with the other people. Connecticut. New blazer, road, connection. Yes. I am also having a new pen and a new jersey. I am at the prime of my youth. Yeah, that is why all the new things. Yes. So without any delay, I want to get married. And I have the choice of marrying one of the two virgin girls. North Carolina or South Carolina. Yeah. I met them and introduced myself to them that I was George. Oh yeah. There is no need to remember that. None. So make it funny, you will also be able to remember. Yeah. The first 4 colonies. I'll show you the list. I've shown you this, right? Yeah. This I have drawn. There is no need to draw. Raw materials, manufactured products, enslaved Africans, triangular slavery, nothing new. Yes? The 13 colonies. Are you able to see the colonies along the Atlantic coast? So the first 4 colonies, if you look at the location, they are in the northern part of the continent. They are called as North colonies. Just right next to them, North colonies. So the more the north you go, the more the cold you feel. Right? North colonies had an extremely cold weather, a very cold weather. In extreme cold, you cannot practice agriculture, right? So, what were the important economic activities in the North colonies? There were activities like lumbering. What do you mean by lumbering? Cutting down timber, wood, and selling it. Lumbering. Economic activities were lumbering, shipbuilding. With wood you could build ships, right? Lumbering, shipbuilding, fishing, cattle rearing, collecting leather and fur. You know fur, right? Fur, the hair of animals. Yeah. Collecting leather and fur. These are the important economic activities. The next 5 colonies were called middle colonies. Called middle colonies. They also had a cold weather, but not extreme cold. They had a cold weather. And the important economic activities were shipping, using the ships for transport and all. North में shipbuilding, middle में shipping, trade, food processing or food industries. Food industries. Leather industries. Leather industries are also called as tanneries. Leather industries are tanneries. Leather processing industries are called tanneries. And liquor making. Daru. Liquor making. Wine making. The last 4 colonies naturally were called south colonies. North, middle, south. They had a hot and humid weather. They had a hot and humid weather. And hence, they were suitable for agriculture. The European powers, did the European powers cause genocide of native Indians? Or is it due to the spread of diseases? It was mainly due to the spread of diseases. One of your friends is asking, were the Europeans involved in a genocide in the New World? You cannot call it a planned genocide, it was accidental. More due to the spread of diseases for which the natives lacked immunity. So hot and humid weather, they were suitable for agriculture. So what were the important agricultural crops cultivated? Tea. Hot and humid weather mein how can you grow wheat, boss? Rice, corn, sugar cane, correct? Rice, corn, sugar cane, cotton, indigo, tobacco. The only country growing tea in the world at this point of time was China. It is a closely guarded secret. Yeah. In addition to that, they also had cattle farming. Huh? Come again? Leather, but predominantly in middle colonies. Cattle farming. They also had iron industries, because iron ore was available. They also had iron industries. So not only had the Britishers established the 13 colonies, various economic activities had started in these colonies. And these colonies had three different groups of people. One, the Native Americans. Two, the Britishers initially, later mixed Europeans. Three, black African slaves to help in all the economic activities. Clear? So who established these colonies? People of British origin. Are you getting it? So initially they were loyal to Britain. They were loyal to Britain because Britain was their mother country. So British policies with respect to the colonies. What were the British policies with respect to the colonies? Now, Britain considered the colonists to be valuable business partners. Britain considered the colonists to be valuable business partners.
Native Americans or other.
Who colonized the 13 territories in North America?
British considered themselves as valuable.
British considered the colonists. By colonists, I mean the British people who established the 13 colonies. I hope you're able to understand. By now you should have understood. So Britain considered the colonists to be valuable business partners. As a result, the British government gave some concessions to the colonists. Gave some concession to the colonists. What sort of concession? For example, the colonists were allowed to establish local governments. The colonists were allowed to establish local governments to govern their territories. Meaning, these 13 different colonies had individual governments. They were not united, they were separate entities. Each colony had a government which was allowed by Britain. But these governments in the 13 colonies were subject to the authority of the British Crown. Because without British Crown's permission, the colonies could not have been established. So under the authority of the Crown, each colony had a governor. Like there were governors for British territories in India, Bombay, Madras, Calcutta. Each colony had a governor appointed by the Crown. And under the governor, there were two different bodies. The first one was Governor's Council. Governor's Council, which helped him in executive functions, implementing the laws. Each governor was helped by an executive council or governor's council, as well as a general assembly. Right? Okay. Okay. Chinese. The General Assembly was the legislative body enacting the laws. Governor's Council, executive body; General Assembly, legislative body. So wealthy colonists could become members of the General Assembly. So colonists were governing themselves, subject to the authority of the British Crown. And these legislatures like General Assembly had the power to enact laws, naturally, legislature. They had the power to levy taxes. They could also recruit troops for their protection, for the protection of the colonies. Got it? So taxes were imposed on the colonies from the very beginning. But try to understand that taxes in the colonies were minimal compared to the taxes in Britain. For example, a colonist living in one of the 13 colonies, if he paid £1 in taxes per year, a British citizen living in Britain was paying £26 per year in taxes. So the ratio between the colonies and Britain regarding taxation was 1:26. So taxes were there, but taxes were very minimal. Clear? So 13 colonies had been established. They were independent entities. Each colony had a government subject to the authority of the British Crown. Economic activities had started. Now, why was such a concession given to the colonists? Why were they allowed to establish governments? Because at the end of the day, these are British people who are loyal to Britain and the British Crown. Clear? So in return for such concessions given to the colonists, the colonists agreed. Once such concession was given, the colonists agreed to supply raw materials to Britain. The colonists agreed to supply various raw materials to Britain. And to provide markets for British goods. Sir, we'll give you all the raw materials. If you want to sell something, we'll help you in selling such things in the colonies. They also agreed not to compete with Britain in foreign trade. They told if you are exporting a particular commodity to one country, we will not undercut the British prices. We will not provide such commodities at low prices to those countries. So we will not compete with you in foreign trade, we will provide all the raw materials and markets. They promised. And to ensure that the promise was fulfilled, the British government came up with a set of laws. Are you getting? You promise your dad that I will score more than 80% in this examination. Dad will tell you, you should not go to a movie till the exam is over. You should not fall in love. Laws would be imposed, right? Restrictions would be imposed. Same way, to make sure that the promises are fulfilled, the British government enforced some restrictions on the colonies through laws. So, the British government came up with legislations to restrict and control colonial trade and industries. The British government came up with legislations to control colonial trade and industries. Now, why to restrict and control colonial trade and industries? To ensure wealth accumulation in Britain. So, these legislations were enacted to ensure wealth accumulation in Britain. That is why these legislations were called as, anybody? Anybody? Mercantilistic legislations. What is mercantilism? Accumulation of wealth in the mother country. Wealth was also accumulating in the colonies, but relatively more wealth was accumulating in Britain. So, what were such trading regulations? What were such trading regulations? These trading regulations were given the common name called navigation laws. Trading regulations are given the common name navigation laws. Under navigation laws, there were many legislations, but the common name is navigation laws. Navigation Act of 1651, Commodities Act of 1660, Staples Act of 1663, Plantation Duty Act of 1673, Enforcement Act of 1696. Common name is navigation laws. It is sufficient if you remember navigation laws. So navigation laws were mercantilistic legislations which helped in the accumulation of wealth in Britain. How? How did they help in the accumulation of wealth? See here. Now, according to these navigation laws, which were enacted over a period of roughly half a century, the colonial commodities, various raw materials from the colonies, for example, rice, cotton, indigo, various commodities from the colonies could be exported only to Britain. The British government gave a list of commodities. So such commodities could be exported only to Britain. So what is the advantage of Britain? Even if some other country was willing to pay high prices, they could export only to Britain. Meaning, Britain got access to cheap raw materials. So where would the wealth accumulate? Britain. And these exports were to happen only in British ships. Exports were to happen only in British ships. Sort of. Why only British ships? So that shipping industry in Britain would grow. Where would the wealth accumulate? Britain. Now these navigation laws could also be used to counter the Dutch who are dominating North American trade. Who are dominating North America trade? Dutch, right? So navigation laws could also be used to counter Dutch domination. Why? Only exports could only happen in British ships. Imports into the 13 colonies could happen. Colonies could import whatever commodities they wanted. Yes.
So earlier the basic happening on the Dutch ships.
Earlier?
Earlier was it that only happening in the Dutch ships?
No, not only in the Dutch ships. The Dutch dominated, I told you. Indian team dominated England in the third test. Does that mean the English did not play? English also played, right? But they failed. They were defeated. Same way, Dutch dominated the North American trade, but British were also doing trade. Clear? Now the attempt was to remove Dutch from the equation so that Britain could have a monopoly. But monopoly was not established. Britain attempted to establish monopoly. Clear? So imports into the 13 colonies could also happen, but only via British ports. For example, if the colonies wanted to import something from, let's say, India, the import was to happen only via British ports. So in each port they could levy a custom duty. So who would earn the tax revenue? Britain. Wealth accumulation. So imports via British ports made the imports costly. Clear?
Why were these policies so loyal to British?
Why?
Why were these policies so loyal to British?
They had no choice. They had no choice. It was the British Crown that allowed the establishment of colonies, meaning the British Crown could control the colonies. They could also ask other people to replace the existing rulers.
Were they somehow related to the British crown?
Some of them were. Some of them were. Some of them were relatives, some of them were friends. We will not go down that route, because if you go down that route, then there are three categories of colonies: charter colonies, proprietary colonies, and crown colonies. We will not go down that route. Yeah. Let us keep it simple. So imports could happen only via British ports. Exports to non-British territories was also allowed. Exports to non-British territories was also allowed. For example, the colonies could also export their commodities to France. But for this export to non-British territories, they had to pay a duty to Britain, tax to Britain. So even if the colonies exported to some other countries, they had to pay tax to Britain. So exports to non-British territories was also allowed by paying a duty.
Sir, starting colonial commodities only exported to Britain.
Hmm.
And here exports to non-British territory.
Was allowed. Later. I told you navigation laws was not just a single legislation. There were many legislations, right? Are you getting it? To implement these laws, the British government established a board of trade and naval codes to regulate the trade, a board of trade, and to punish the evaders of the law or violators of the law. A series of naval codes were also established. So the laws were seriously implemented, wealth would have accumulated in Britain. That is why mercantile legislations. So these are trading regulations. What were the industrial regulations? Industrial regulations में there are 3 laws. Wool Act of 1699, Hat Act of 1732, Iron Act of 1750. Wool Act, Hat Act, Iron Act. If you've copied the 3 legislations, take this down. 2 sentences bus. Wool and the Hat Acts. 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 Prohibited. Wool and the Hat Acts prohibited the export of finished and semi-finished. Export of finished and semi-finished woolen products and hats. Finished and semi-finished woolen products and hats from the American colonies or from the 13 colonies, not American, we'll do that later. From the 13 colonies. Why? You collect wool, the fur of the animals, yeah, you make a product, for example a jacket out of it, you export it to Britain. What would happen? Wealth would accumulate in the colonies. Why? Finished products are always costly. So Britain wanted the raw material to make such jackets, raw materials to make hats. That is why the export of finished and semi-finished woolen products and hats were prohibited from the colonies, because Britain needed the raw materials. Iron Act. Iron Act. Iron Act. Prohibited the colonists from establishing advanced iron production facilities. Advanced iron production facilities. What will happen if you establish advanced iron production facilities? You will make all the tools and implements you need. You can also start exporting such tools and implements to other countries. So where would the wealth accumulate? In the colonies. So Britain told the colonies, boss, you cannot establish advanced iron production facilities. You can produce bars of iron and export that iron to Britain. We will supply you the tools and implements. Are you able to understand? So where would the wealth accumulate? In Britain. So that is why I told you these regulations and restrictions were mercantilistic in nature. Clear? Yes. But not everything looked bad for the colonists. There were some positive developments also. In the same time frame, there were some positive developments. So what were the positive developments? There were two positive developments actually. The first positive development was gentleman's resolution. Why? 1689. Do you remember Glorious Revolution of 1688? After Glorious Revolution, after Parliament's primacy, gentleman's resolution was passed by British Parliament. What was gentleman's resolution? This resolution promised representation. This resolution promised representation. This resolution promised representation to the tax-paying sections. To the tax-paying sections of the British society. Let me repeat. This resolution promised representation. This resolution promised representation to the tax-paying sections of the British society in the British Parliament. In the British Parliament. In the British Parliament. Now, were the colonists paying taxes? Yes, they were paying taxes. Were they British people? Yes, they are part of British society. So the gentleman's resolution told in the future the colonists could have their MPs in the British Parliament. I hope you're getting it. Why do you make a promise? To give hope? Yeah, but will you ever make an unbreakable promise? Will you ever make an unbreakable promise? Nobody likes to. Nobody likes to. Even if they do, those promises are meant to be broken. So the primary purpose of making a promise is to break that promise. I hope you're getting it. Yeah. So a promise had been given. So the colonists were expecting that soon they will have their MPs in the British Parliament. First positive thing. Second positive thing was, okay, that is not working. Policy of salutary neglect. Policy of salutary neglect. Policy of salutary neglect. This policy of salutary neglect was the lax implementation of trading regulations and loose imperial control over internal affairs of colonies. Lax matlab non-serious. Lax means non-serious, non-strict. Lax implementation of trading regulations and loose imperial or crown's control over the internal affairs of the colonies. Meaning the Britishers had enacted a series of trading and industrial regulations, but they chose not to implement them seriously. Oh my God. Is dowry illegal in India? Yes? No? Does the government implement such laws seriously? No, sir. Why? Not practical. Not practical. If dowry is illegal, then who's giving, who's taking? Everyone, sir. Everyone, nay, sir. Not everyone, sir. Only the boys. Morons. Who takes dowry in India? Which side takes dowry in India? Huh? Both sides. Groom's side, okay. Boys' side. Yeah. Groom's side, yes, I understand. What kind of dowry do they ask for? Cash. Aye. He is telling his preference. Are you from Andhra? Anybody from Andhra here? They have a rate card for dowry, literally a rate card for dowry. Engineers, few lakhs, doctors, few crores, bureaucrats, unlimited. Yeah. Cash, property, vehicles, what not. Idiots. They ask for tangible dowry. Dowry which you can see. Girl side also ask for dowry. Intangible dowry. What is intangible dowry? Which you cannot see. Most of it which you cannot see. What? Handsome boy with six-pack. What? They get a single pack. Yeah. That is at least okay. You want a beautiful girl, they want a handsome boy. Fine. Good education. At least a 5-digit salary. You are paying dowry for life. 5-digit salary. Own house. Own car. No EMI. Less siblings. If possible, no mother-in-law. Is that not dowry? That is also dowry, boss. So both sides have to be blamed. It's okay. But we are victimized. Right? It's fine. Now, a set of laws had been enacted regarding the colonies, but the British government chose not to implement the laws seriously, which we call a salutary neglect. Why to enact laws and choose not to implement them in a strict manner? There were some practical reasons. So what were the reasons behind salutary neglect? Reasons behind salutary neglect. Reasons behind salutary neglect. How many of you have been hostelers in your life? Hostelers? Okay, fine. After so many years of relatively stricter life living with your parents, the moment you ventured into hostels, you would have had a newly earned notion of freedom. You'd have started experimenting with your life, started doing all the mischievous things. You would have at least attempted or dreamed, thinking that you are free. But what if your parents still want to maintain a strict control over you? I have sent my kid to college. He might be spoiled. Let me bring him up in a strict manner as a disciplined kid. What if your father comes and sits in a hostel room every day? Will you like it? For first 2 days it will be okay. Third day, Papa, don't you have any work? If you keep on staying here, you lose your promotion. You lose your business. You lose your career. Am I right? Wife will be relieved. Ask your mother. Ask your mother. She'll be living like a free individual. As if you attempted to live as a free individual in a hostel. She'll be having a vacation at least, finally. Ask ladies, they'll let you know. Yeah, fine. You won't like it, your friends won't like it. It is not practical because your father will lose his career. You'll start hating your father at one point of time for intruding into your freedom. It'll happen, everybody is human, right? They've done the same mistakes. Let us do the same mistakes and learn. Life is an experience, right? Yes? Yes. Now imagine British government had allowed the colonists, allowed British citizens to establish colonies and enforced a set of restrictions and regulations. Initially the colonists would have started hating, but later they would have adopted. Arey, Britain imposing control, it's fine. The laws were there. But if the British government attempted to implement those laws very seriously, let's say the colonists were involved in activities of smuggling. Navigation law was against smuggling, against exporting to other countries. Let's say the colonists attempted to smuggle goods to other countries. Britain could have technically, theoretically prevented the smuggling activities, but not practically. Why? The colonists were distributed north to south. Britain was 5,000 kilometers away from the colonies. Are you getting it? If navigation laws were to be implemented strictly, the British Navy had to patrol the whole Atlantic coast. They did not have modern ships. They had sailed vessels. SAILED. Sailed vessels matlab Jack Sparrow ka black pearl. Ships with huge saris, huge clothes which harness wind power. Are you getting it? And all the British Navy had to be present in the Atlantic coast to implement the navigation law seriously. British government had to appoint various officers to see to the implementation of the laws. Meaning, the cost involved in implementing the navigation laws would have been huge. Am I right? So the first reason for salutary neglect, huge cost involved in the implementation of such control. Huge cost involved in the implementation of such control. Huge cost involved in the implementation of such control. Okay, if the British Navy was present only in the Atlantic Ocean, how could the British establish a worldwide empire? If your father was running only after you, how could he focus on his career? He would not get a promotion, right? So second reason for salutary neglect, Britain wanted to focus on European politics. Britain wanted to focus on European politics and not only on the colonies. Not only on the colonies. Why? Britain wanted to become a world power. That is why they implemented salutary neglect. Okay. Even if the colonists were involved in activities of smuggling, the British did not punish them. British government did not punish them. Meaning, the colonists could make wealth By violating the navigation laws. Are you getting it? Like you gained experience by violating your parents' control, you would have become a better person. Most of us become better persons during our college days. Right? Third reason. Wealth accumulation in the colonies. Wealth accumulation in the colonies. You do all the mistakes, get experiences, learn, become a better person, get a job, and who are you going to work for? Your interest, your family ka interest. Ultimately, your family is going to get benefited, right? If you're not a sociopath or a psychopath, your family is going to get benefited, right? So if wealth was going to accumulate in the colonies, what were they going to do with this wealth? They would have been paying taxes. Okay, smuggled goods ka wealth, let's say. They'll not pay taxes, but wealth would have accumulated. Using that wealth, they would have wanted to create a better life. How to make your life better? Import all the modern tools, implements, commodities. Now where to import from? Britain. Britain was getting industrialized. Wealth accumulation in the colonies would create a large market for British goods. Would create a large market for British goods. So end of the day, the money was going to go to Britain. Because Britain was the only country getting industrialized. Super. Now which father do you like? The father who respects your freedom or the father who comes and sits in your hostel room? The father who respects your freedom. So which government did the colonists like? The government that supported salutary neglect or the government that enforced strict control? Salutary neglect. So you love your papa, na? Same way. The fourth reason, the colonists would stay loyal to Britain. The colonists would stay loyal to Britain. So those were the four reasons for implementing salutary neglect. But understand, salutary neglect was not a written or formal policy. It was an unwritten policy. Like the government is turning an indifferent eye towards dowry, unless otherwise it creates problem. Salutary neglect was an unwritten or an informal policy. Unwritten and informal policy, which had been implemented from 1721 by the British government. But what salutary neglect meant to the colonists was this. Salutary neglect meant political autonomy and freedom of trade to the colonists. Salutary neglect meant political autonomy and freedom of trade to the colonists. What do you mean by that? Now Britain chose not to interfere normally into the colonies. So the colonists started thinking, "Arey yaar, we have all the political rights. We are living in a free country. We can trade with any other country we want. We can even smuggle, earn money." Like you thought you were a free individual during your hostel life. You experimented with your life, na? But your dad could come back any day and slap you. You think that you are free, but you aren't practically. If your dad wishes to implement strict control, he can. But for the time being, you are thinking you are free. Same way the colonists thought they were politically autonomous and they could trade with any country. So salutary neglect meant political autonomy and freedom of trade to the colonists. Clear? So what were the conditions in the colonies? till mid 18th century. General conditions in the colonies till mid 18th century. Or if you want to be very specific, till 1763. Now that explains the timeline for the American Revolution. What is the timeline for the American Revolution? 1763, 75, 83. So what are the conditions in the colonies till mid 18th century? 1. Salutary neglect meant political autonomy and freedom of trade. So the colonial legislatures thought they could enact whatever laws they wanted. The colonists thought they could trade with any country they wanted. For example, because of salutary neglect, particularly due to the freedom of trade, the colonists started consuming smuggled tea. Britain was also providing tea. Britain was importing tea from China, and the tea was sent to the colonies. But British tea was costly. So the colonies started consuming smuggled tea. Who smuggled the tea into the colonies? Dutch. Dutch helped in smuggling tea. In fact, 86% of the tea consumed in the colonies was smuggled. 86% of the tea consumed by the colonists was smuggled. And tea was a really costly commodity. Very costly. If you have attempted reading modern India, you would have come to know that a British king married a Portuguese princess. Charles married Catherine, and Charles got a dowry from Portuguese, Bombay. Charles had no practical use for Bombay because he was in Britain. So Charles gave Bombay on lease to East India Company. The lease amount was 10 pounds per year. 10 British pounds per year. The cost of 1 kilogram of tea at this point of time was 10 pounds. So Bombay ka lease amount was equivalent to 1 kilogram of tea. So tea was such a costly commodity. So because of this smuggling, Britishers had been losing money. British government had been losing money, but they did not mind. Why? With that money, a large market for British goods would be created in the colonies. Clear? Meaning, the colonies were getting prosperous due to trade contacts with Britain as well as salutary neglect. Colonists were getting prosperous because of trading contacts with Britain and the policy of salutary neglect. Now, increasing prosperity in the colonies resulted in urbanization. Increasing prosperity in the colonies resulted in urbanization. Many new cities were established. For example, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Savannah. Many new prominent cities came into being in the colonies. Within the colony of New York, there was a city called New York. Modern educational institutions were established. Modern educational institutions were established. Spread of education became possible. modern educational institutions like William and Mary College. Do you remember Glorious Revolution, William and Mary?
Yes, sir.
Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Brown colleges. Many such educational institutions were established. William Mary College, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Brown. Today these institutions are called as Ivy League institutions. Some of the most prominent in the world, whole world. MIT. Now the spread of education resulted in increased rationalism. Spread of education resulted in increased rationalism. Simultaneously, press activities also started. Press activities started in the colonies. And many newspapers came to be published. Many newspapers came to be published. Newspapers like American Mercury, Boston Newsletter, New York Reporter, Pennsylvania Gazette, they came to be published. What is the question? Why colonists agree to control? I have already answered that question, I believe. Yeah. And some prominent personalities, due to the contribution of prominent personalities like Benjamin Franklin. Remember that name. Benjamin Franklin played an important role in the establishment of American Philosophical Society in 1743, where in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is a place in Pennsylvania. What do you do in philosophy? You discuss new ideas. Now, due to establishment of American Philosophical Society, Enlightenment ideas started getting popular. So the efforts of Benjamin Franklin and his friends led to the popularity of Enlightenment ideas. So what were the ideas of Enlightenment? We discussed in the first class. Democratism, republicanism, rule of law, individual rights, progressivism, tolerance. Such ideas started getting popular. And gradually, a new society started developing in the colonies. A new type of society started developing in the colonies. This society was characterized by important, tolerant, liberal, progressive, cosmopolitan, and materialistic ideas. The society was characterized by tolerant, liberal, cosmopolitan, and materialistic ideas. You need to understand these words. Tolerant, broad-minded. Tolerant, broad-minded. Right, the meaning. Tolerant, broad-minded. Liberal, open to new ideas. Progressive, supporting modernity and progress. Supporting modernity and progress. Cosmopolitan, a society with a world view. People living in a cosmopolitan society, they think they are the citizens of humanity, citizens of the world. Why? In a cosmopolitan setup, people having different backgrounds live. Cosmopolitan society is relatively modern. For example, Delhi is a cosmopolitan city. Why? People from different states, people of different religions, professions, races, religions, countries live in Delhi. Relatively modern. Nobody minds what the others are doing. You can drink in the streets of Delhi. Can you try doing that in your village? You can. Yeah, but it is considered to be, not bad for health. It is considered to be detrimental to the culture. Orthodox. Yes. This society was also influenced by individualism and capitalism. Characterized by tolerant, liberal, influenced by individualism and capitalism. What is individualism? The practice of being independent, self-reliant. People living in USA are relatively more independent, self-reliant. Do you see them camping often? They'll go out, camp. They do all their own work, painting, carpenting, repairing their automobiles. Even today they do it themselves. Why? They are independent and self-reliant. Capitalism, you understand. Why? They are people of British origin. Clear? So gradually a new type of society with an unique American identity developed in the colonies. When the colonies were established, the founders of those colonies were loyal to Britain. As generations passed, the new breed of colonists, the new generation of people in the colonies thought that they were more American than British. An unique American identity emerged, like it happens with us. How many of you have visited your villages? Most of you, yes. How often do you visit your villages? Once a year? Twice a year? Once a year most probably, or once in a few years. How about your grandfather? He would have been living in that village. Or some of you might live in that village. No problem. Yeah. How about your father? He would have visited the village frequently. He would have lived in the village for some time. He would have migrated to a city. He would have been visiting the village frequently. You? Once in few years. How about your children? In the future? They will visit the village a few times in their lifetime. How about their children, your great grandchildren? They would know that they were from India. As generations progress, you get distant from your roots. You might be having roots from village, but today you'll be calling yourself as Delhiite, Mumbaikar, a part of CSK, Chennai Super Kings. But you would be from a village. Same way, the new breed of Americans thought that they were more American than British. Clear? So such a development had been happening in the colonies. The colonies were getting prosperous, more rational. At the same time, there were some problems regarding the North American territories. There was a major problem between the British and the French in North America. If you look at the colonies, European colonies in North America, the British colonies were distributed along the Atlantic coast. The French territories were located close to modern day Canada. Are you getting it? Between the British and the French territory, there was a river called Ohio. And around this river, we had Ohio River Valley. But there was no clarity as to who did this territory belong to. Nobody was sure. French claimed Ohio River Valley belonged to them. The British colonists, they also claimed that Ohio River Valley belonged to them. Meaning, the British and the French had territorial disputes regarding Ohio River Valley. Conditions in the colonies, right? Next point. Initially promising, later conflicting. So there were territorial disputes between the French and the British regarding Ohio River Valley. But in the river valley, Ohio River Valley, many tribes were also living. What do you call the tribes? Indians. So the French tried getting the help of some tribes to defeat the colonists, British colonists. Now the territorial conflicts resulted in French and Indian wars. So French and a few tribes, that is Indians, they attacked the British colonies. French, with the help of some tribes, Indians, they attacked the British colonies in 1754. So French-Indian wars had started. And the French-Indian wars continued till 1763. Continued till 1763. So French and Indians had started attacking different colonies because of the disputes regarding Ohio River Valley. Now were the 13 colonies united? No, they were separate identities, independent of each other. Now when these attacks started, the colonists convened a congress. It's called as Albany Congress. Albany is a place in New York. So representatives of a few colonies out of the 13, they convened Albany Congress. Benjamin Franklin was also a participant in the Albany Congress. Benjamin Franklin was also a participant in the Albany Congress. So French and Indians attacked. The representatives of different colonies, they convened Albany Congress. In this Albany Congress, for the first time ever, Benjamin Franklin proposed a plan for an American Union. He proposed a plan for an American Union. He told the colonies should unite. Why? To counter the French and the Indians. So for the first time he proposed a plan for uniting the colonists, a plan for an American Union. In this regard, he also published a political cartoon called Join or Die. Join or Die. In his Pennsylvania Gazette. He told the American people that they should either join, defeat the French and Indians, or die, or they would perish. It was the first time such a development happened in the American history. So French-Indian wars had started in 1754, they were going on. In the meantime, a major conflict had started in Europe. The conflict was none other than 7 Years' War. 7 Years' War, that was assignment, right? What is the timeline for 7 Years' War? (1756 to 63), 7 Years' War. Let me tell you, wait. So French-Indian wars were going on. In the meantime, 7 Years' War started in Europe. Why did the 7 Years' War start? Austria wanted. In Central Europe, I hope you know, central part of Europe, there was an empire called Holy Roman Empire. There was an empire called Holy Roman Empire. The leader of the Holy Roman Empire was a country called Austria, which was ruled by Habsburg dynasty. You might have read the word Habsburg while reading the story. So the leader of Holy Roman Empire was Habsburg Austria. The second most dominant country in the Holy Roman Empire was Prussia, which was ruled by Hohenzollern dynasty. Remember the name Hohenzollern as well as Habsburg. Both are important. Hohenzollern dynasty. Now, two powerful kingdoms in Holy Roman Empire, both were competitors. Now, Prussia controlled a territory historically. The territory was called as Silesia. Prussia controlled a territory called Silesia. The problem started when Austria wanted Silesia. Now, who was the leader of Holy Roman Empire? Austria. So, Austrian rulers told, we want Silesia. But Prussia was not ready to give Silesia. Conflict started. So 7 Years' War started when Austria wanted Silesia from Prussia. So who were fighting in the 7 Years' War? Prussia versus Austria. In this conflict, Prussia was supported by Britain and Portugal. Austria was supported by France and Spain. There were other countries participating as well, but these were the major players. That is beyond the purview of our discussion right now. You can read, Google and read. I am trying to simplify. When I tell you a thing, there are 100 things running here. That's the curse of an optional teacher. I am trying to limit myself. So if I say something, that is more than sufficient. Otherwise it will unnecessarily complicate the story. So Austria wanted Silesia from Prussia. 7 years war started. India-Pakistan match, cricket match happening in Chennai, let's say. A wrong decision, one country gets defeated. Pakistani and Indian cricket fans start fighting all over the world. So the epicenter of this conflict was in Europe. And most importantly, the British and the French were fighting on the opposite sides in this war. So British and the French started fighting throughout the world. So where were the British and French fighting? North America. Which war was going on? French and Indian wars. So British and French started fighting in North America. So who are helping? Here, see here. France, supported by some tribes, Indians, versus the colonists. They were also supported by some other tribes. Now, British government sent their military. French government sent their military. You asked where the British troops were deployed, right? Countries got involved. Who were present in South America? Spanish, Portuguese. They started fighting. Europeans were also involved in Africa, coastal areas of Africa. They started fighting in Africa. They started fighting in India. Already the British and the French were involved in Carnatic Wars. First Carnatic War 1746-48, second Carnatic War 1749-54, third Carnatic War 1758-63. Am I right? So British and the French started fighting in India. They started fighting in Philippines. So 7 years war, which had its epicenter in Europe, happened in 5 different continents, had affected 5 continents. Which continents? Europe, North, South America, Europe, North, South America, Africa, Asia. In India, we call this war as Third Carnatic War. So what are the expressions of this war in India? How was this war expressed in India? Obviously Third Carnatic War, but there is another expression which is the Battle of Plassey. When the war starts in Europe, the British and the French who are present in Bengal start constructing fortifications around their factories. Siraj-ud-Dawla, the Nawab of Bengal, objects. French destroy their fortification. British challenge Siraj-ud-Dawla. Siraj-ud-Dawla attacks the British factories. Black hole tragedy happens. Clive and Watson are sent from Madras. Siraj-ud-Dawla gets defeated in the Battle of Plassey. So the background for the Battle of Plassey was 7 years war. I hope you're getting it. So is the background for Third Carnatic War. Even North America, French and Indian wars had become a theatre of 7 years war. Theatre means a place where similar war happened. Are you getting it? So who got victorious in the 7 Years' War, ma? Who got victorious? Huh? Prussia was victorious. Austria got defeated. Meaning France also got defeated. And Britain was victorious. So the war had come to an end with the Treaty of Paris, 1763. Treaty of Paris, 1763. Yes? So Britain was victorious in this war, but the war had cost Britain dearly. Britain had to spend hell a lot of money on this war. Now due to this war, the national debt of Britain, debit of Britain, increased by 80%. The national loan debt of Britain increased by 80% due to this war. So Britain was facing an economic crisis due to this war. Now in the Ukraine-Russia conflict, both the countries are facing an economic crisis, right? Likewise, Britain was facing a huge economic crisis due to the war, because the war happened in 5 different continents. That is why 7 Years' War is called as the first global conflict. 7 Years' War is called as the first global conflict. In fact, it was a precursor, a model for the world wars. Did the colonists in the 13 colonies help Britain during the war? Yes. The colonists, the British colonists in the 13 colonies helped Britain in 7 Years' War. How? French-Indian War was happening. So they helped Britain to defeat the French in the French-Indian Wars. So Britain had deployed troops. So the British government and the colonists had been helping each other. That is why the timeline for the 7 Years' War, look at the timeline. Now why would the colonists help Britain during the war? They would have lost men, materials, lives in the war. Why did they help Britain? Because the colonists thought if the British were victorious, they would allow them to expand into Ohio River Valley. Sir, we are helping you after the war. Allow us to expand into Ohio River Valley so that we can spread our territories, expand our territories and business. That is why they had been helping the British government. So the colonists helped Britain. Britain was victorious. But after the war, the British king ka name at this point of time, remember that name, important. British king, his name was George III. After the war, British king George III, if you want his timeline, 1760 to 1820. Once the war was over, the British king George III issued the proclamation of 1763. British King George issued the proclamation of 1763, which prohibited the expansion of colonial trade and territories. which prohibited the expansion of colonial trade and territories. Which prohibited the expansion of colonial trade and territories to the west. To the west. Now, why would the king prohibit the expansion of colonial trade and territories? Colonists helped Britain during the war. Now, why would he prohibit? Because George wanted to maintain good relations with the tribes. Otherwise, tribes would end up supporting France again. So he told the colonists, do not expand. But the colonists did not like it. Sir, we helped you, you are betraying us. Now this is the background to the whole topic. If you understood the discussion till now, you are ready for the causes for the American Revolution. Causes for the American Revolution. Causes for the American Revolution. Causes for the American Revolution, take down. Political causes. Political causes. First political cause, take this down. First political cause, take this down. Defective administration. Can you switch this AC on, please? It's humid, right? Yeah. Defective administration. Under that, right? Colonial legislatures had the power to enact laws, levy taxes, and recruit troops. Full stop. Salutary neglect gave a sense of autonomy to the colonists. Full stop. British government imposed legislations on the colonists, not colonists, on the colonies to prevent the colonial legislatures from achieving complete autonomy. Within brackets, right, is an example which I'll explain later. Within brackets, right, example. New York Restraining Act 1767. I'll explain later. New York Restraining Act 1767. This made the colonial legislatures rebellious. This made the colonial legislatures rebellious. And the leaders of the revolution were born. And the leaders of the revolution were born. Second political cause. Leaders of the revolution were born. Second political cause. Taxation without representation. Taxation without representation. Seems like an economic point, not, it is not. Taxation without representation. Despite the taxes in the colonies, being much lower than in Britain, despite the taxes in the colonies being much lower than in Britain. 1:26 I told you, comma. The colonists were dissatisfied due to the lack of representation. In the British Parliament. Full stop. Without representation, they thought, without representation, they thought British government had no right to tax them. British government had no right to tax them. Economic causes. If you are not able to understand any point, please let me know then and there. Economic causes. Under that, first economic cause, role of salutary neglect. Salutary neglect expanded the freedom of trade. And added to colonial prosperity. The economic crisis, hope so, let's see. The economic crisis caused by 7 years war. Forced the British rulers to end salutary neglect. and replace it with policy of strict control. Policy of strict control, which did not go well. Which did not go well with the colonists. Which did not go well with the colonists. Which did not go well with the colonists. Next economic cause. Proclamation of 1763. Proclamation of 1763. King George III's proclamation. King George III's proclamation of 1763 prohibited the expansion of colonial trade and territories to the west. Colonial territories and trade to the west. The colonists considered this to be a betrayal. Considered this to be a betrayal, B-E-T-R-A-Y-A-L. Considered this to be a betrayal by George. Next set of causes. Social causes. Social causes. Social causes mean there is only one cause. Write it. Yes. AC? It's very cold. Hot. Chala do. Make us comfortable. 24, 23 should be fine. Minus. He is in a different mood. After the class. Yeah. So, diversification, detachment, dynamism, dissatisfaction. He wants the climate of Switzerland. Okay. Only one cause. Take this down. You know this already. Can somebody tell me what is migration? Migration? Moving from one place to other. Okay. What is immigration? Then what is emigration? E-M-I. Both are migrations. Emigration is the act of moving out of a country to reside in another country for a long period of time or permanently. Clear? So if you leave India to live in Pakistan, Indian government will call you an emigrant. You're exiting India, emigrant. Pakistani government will call you immigrant because you are moving into Pakistan. Clear? Yes? Take this now. Immigration, IMMI, immigration. Immigration is what? Moving of people into a country. Immigration of people of different nationalities. Immigration of people of different nationalities. Religions. Races, RACEs, races. And professions. And professions, PROFESSI, professions. Gradually diversified. The colonial society. Gradually diversified the colonial society. Full stop. The promotion of cosmopolitan ideas. Tolerant attitude. Individualism. And capitalism. Created an unique American identity. And the new generation of colonists. Felt more American than British. Next paragraph. The evolution of liberal ideas. Evolution of liberal ideas. Progressivism. And increasing prosperity. Infused, INFUSED, infused मतलब added. Infused. Dynamism. What do you mean by dynamism? Characterized by rapid changes and vigorous activity. Infused dynamism in the colonies. Meaning colonial society was rapidly getting modernized. Full stop. On the other hand, Britain was dominated by privileged classes. And Their exploitative policies, exploitative policies regarding the colonies, their exploitative policies regarding the colonies dissatisfied the colonists. Dissatisfied the colonists. Intellectual causes. Next set of causes, intellectual causes. Intellectual causes. First sub cause, intellectual causes में first cause. Role of education and press. Role of education and press. Role of education and press. Write down. The spread of education. The spread of education and intense press activities spread of education and intense press activities added to the rationalism and helped in shaping colonial sentiments against Britain. Colonial sentiments against Britain. Second intellectual cause. Increasing intellectual awareness. Newspapers, increasing intellectual awareness under that. Newspapers. Disseminated, matlab spread. Another word for spread is disseminated. Newspapers disseminated Enlightenment ideas an increased intellectual awareness in the colonies. Full stop. Benjamin Franklin mooted matlab started, initiated. Benjamin Franklin mooted the idea of an American Union. And promoted republicanism through Pennsylvania Gazette. Pennsylvania Gazette. Full stop. anti-monarchical मतलब writings against monarchy. Anti-monarchical ideas. Anti-monarchical ideas of scholars like John Locke and Algernon Sidney. You'd have heard about John Locke, I believe. He says that all men are born equal. But man is born free, but everywhere in chains. He also adds to that idea. He initiated that idea before Rousseau. John Locke and Algernon Sidney became great inspirations. For American revolutionaries. Samuel Adams, James Otis, and Patrick Henry. Remember the names, at least Samuel Adams. Samuel Adams, James Otis, and Patrick Henry. Full stop. Common sense of Thomas Paine. Common sense within quotes, inverted commas. Common Sense was a publication, a book. Common Sense of Thomas Paine. Common Sense of Thomas Paine. Sorry, not Paine's Paine. Common Sense of Thomas Paine ignited nationalistic and patriotic sentiments among the colonists. Next cause, impact of 7 Years' War. Impact of 7 Years' War. Which one? We'll discuss. Not right now, we'll discuss. Impact of 7 Years' War. Who got defeated in 7 Years' War? Austria, France, Spain. Remember. So who were victorious? Britain, Prussia, Portuguese, and American colonists were also victorious, right? French defeat in this war. Reduced the dependence. French defeat in this war reduced the dependence of the colonists. On Britain. They did not need British support anymore because French were defeated in North America. Full stop. On the other hand, British government decided to milk MLK, दूध, to milk the colonies. What do you mean by milking the colonies? Extracting wealth. British government decided to milk the colonies to solve the economic crisis due to the war. To solve the economic crisis due to the war. Full stop. In return for their contribution, to the war, the colonists were disrespected, taxed, and prohibited from expansion. This made the revolution inevitable. What do you mean by inevitable? Unavoidable. Now, most of the points you would have understood from the earlier discussions except for one point. I told you policy of salutary neglect had been ended. It was replaced by policy of strict control. This needs some elaboration, because you need to use such examples in the exam. Cause is over. I'm just elaborating on the policy of strict control. Lots of writing. 2 pages. Causes? More. If you have used the right font size, it will be roughly between 2.5 to 3 pages. Roughly. Correct font size 2.5 to 3 pages. That means you are misusing space. It will hardly be 300-350 words over half an hour. Slightly more than half an hour, meaning your writing speed at this point of time 700 words per hour. So multiply that by 3, 2100 words per hour. Only if you write. I dictate, you write. But in the exam you have to think, process, frame an answer and write. You lose time. You will not have enough time. So you have to be somewhere close to at least. So just roughly double this speed. So if you have been cursing me for the past few minutes for giving the dictation, curse yourself, you are slow. Get fast. Get faster. Okay. Policy of strict control. I told you some British rulers reversed salutary neglect, replaced it with strict control. Those rulers were the British Prime Ministers. So few British Prime Ministers implemented the policy of strict control. Why? Because Britain was facing a huge national debt due to 7 Years' War. So the first such Prime Minister was a person called Greenville, who was a British Prime Minister from 1763 to 65. Greenville ka government came up with many laws to extract money from the colonies, but 2 laws are very, very important. The first law Quartering Act of 1765. Second law was Stamp Act of 1765. Quartering Act and Stamp Act. Remember, during 7 Years' War, thousands of British soldiers had been deployed in the 13 colonies. Why? French-Indian Wars was going on. Are you getting it? Yes? To extract money, they needed strict control. समझ गया? You'll get to know it. So during the 7 Years' War, British troops had been deployed in the 13 British colonies in North America. But once the war was over, the British government did not withdraw the troops. Why? They cited various reasons and forced their troops to stay in the colonies. Because if the troops had been withdrawn, called back to Britain, who had to provide them food and incur the expenditure on various other counts? British government. So the British government told the colonies, "Arey yaar, keep the troops there, it is for your own safety, but you have to maintain their daily expenditure." Are you getting it? According to Quartering Act. According to Quartering Act. The colonies were to provide quarters matlab shelter, lodging. Colonies were to provide quarters, food, drinks. That is a real quarter. Quarters, food, drinks, fuel, and transportation. To the British troops. Stationed in their territories. To the British troops stationed in their territories. So colonies did not want the troops. Arey yaar, war is over, we are not afraid of France, get rid of your troops. But the British government, no, you have to be protected, but you have to incur the expenditure. Made the colonists angry. Okay, this Quartering Act was about daily expenditure of the troops. But how to pay the salary of the troops? For that, Stamp Act was enacted. Stamp Act, take down, Stamp Act mandated matlab made it compulsory. Stamp Act mandated that all the published documents in the colonies, were to be produced on a stamp paper, purchased from Britain. That is not new. Why? Legal document, agreement, stamp paper, normal. But all the published matter, newspapers, magazines, pamphlets, books, playing cards, had to be published on a stamped paper supplied by Britain. That was not free of cost. The colonies had to pay and purchase the paper. So the revenue generated through the Stamp Act was used to pay the salaries of the troops. Are you getting it? Obviously, yes. British troops' salary will be paid by the British government. Where did the money come from?
No colonies have paid its salary.
Colonies, why would the colonies pay the salary?
Only they have to India.
There is some problem in Burma. Indian government deploys the troops in Burma. Who will pay the salary of the Indian troops? Indian government. British troops, right? So British government has to pay the salary. But where did the money come from? Colonies. How? Stamp Act. But observe that these acts were passed by the British Parliament. Did they ask for the opinion of the colonies? Without the consent of the colonies. Are you getting it? So once these acts were passed, protests started in the colonies, particularly against the Stamp Act. Why should we pay the salary? And to show their protest, the colonists organized Stamp Act Congress in 1765, New York. To show their protest to the Stamp Act, the colonists organized Stamp Act Congress in New York. In this Congress, they raised a very, very basic question. What was the question they raised? They insisted on no taxation without representation. First give us representation, then we will talk about taxation. You cannot impose taxes yourself. At least they raised a formal question. You should not impose taxes without representation. But when the Stamp Act was passed, American revolutionaries like Samuel Adams, they established revolutionary groups like Sons of Liberty. Ladies also became revolutionaries. Ladies like Sarah Fulton, Martha Washington. They established Daughters of Liberty. And they raised a more serious question. What question? They questioned the authority of the British Parliament over the colonies. These revolutionary groups, they questioned the authority of the British Parliament over the colonies. With what authority you are passing law regarding our territory? Do we have representation? Then you don't have authority. They questioned the authority of the British Parliament over the colonies. And gradually the protests became widespread and violent. The protests spread to all the colonies. They had also become violent. The people selling stamps were attacked. Stamp houses were burned down. Protests had become violent. So on one hand, Stamp Act was becoming unpopular. On the other hand, Grenville, the British Prime Minister, lost majority in the British Parliament. Greenville government lost majority for different reasons. Greenville government lost majority in the British Parliament. So Britain had a new Prime Minister. The new Prime Minister's name was Rockingham. 1765-66. He was the Prime Minister for just a year. The moment he came to power, he realized that Stamp Act was unpopular. And the Americans had started questioning the authority of the British Parliament. The issue would have turned ugly. So what did he do? Rockingham ka government repealed the Stamp Act in 1766. Within a short time of coming to power, he repealed the Stamp Act. Cancelled the Stamp Act. Act was declared null and void. We did not have proper understanding of the British rule in mid-19th century. We were angry, yes, for different reasons. Here the anger was particularly due to economic reasons. But for us to understand and explain the economic exploitation of India, it took almost 200 years. That became possible only after Dadabhai Naoroji published a book called Poverty and Un-British Rule in India in early 20th century. Then only we could scientifically explain the exploitation. Till that point of time, most of the Indian leaders were loyal to the British. This is not the case here. Because these are British people, they understand the nature of their government. So Stamp Act was repealed in 1766 to solve the issue regarding the colonies. But Rockingham wanted to prove one point. So he passed another act called Declaratory Act in 1766. I am repealing Stamp Act. Fine, you are against Stamp Act, I am repealing it. But my government is passing Declaratory Act. What is Declaratory Act? Declaratory acts in general declare something. That is why they are called Declaratory Act. So what did Declaratory Act declare? It declared that the authority of the British Parliament was the same in Britain and the colonies. Protests, I am repealing the act, but the authority of the British Parliament is the same in Britain as well as in the colonies. British Parliament ka laws have equal power, he said. Authority of the British Parliament is the same in Britain and the colonies. But since protests were going on, he did not impose new taxes. He did not impose new taxes. Did not impose new taxes. But his government lost majority in 1766. And a new Prime Minister had come to power. The Prime Minister's name was William Pitt. William Pitt. William Pitt. Now once Rockingham repealed the Stamp Act and chose not to impose fresh taxes, protests had declined. But at the same time, Stamp Act had failed to raise revenue. So William Pitt came to power in 1766. William Pitt's government passed an act. It was called New York Restraining Act, 1767. New York Restraining Act, 1767. I gave you as an example earlier. political causes में. Just take this down, I'll explain. This act, just write, I'll explain. This act suspended the General Assembly of New York. Suspended the General Assembly of New York for non-compliance. For non-compliance, not obeying. For non-compliance with the Quartering Act. For non-compliance with the Quartering Act. Now what did the Quartering Act say? You have to provide food, drinks, fuel, quarters, blah 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 to the British troops. Who passed the Quartering Act? British Parliament. Clear? But the colonies had a sense of autonomy due to salutary neglect. So British Parliament passed Quartering Act, but New York ka legislature, New York General Assembly passed the law to counter Quartering Act. If you can pass a law, we can also pass a law. Meaning New York General Assembly or New York colony did not obey the Quartering Act. We will not spend for your troops. Now central government passes a law, state government passes another law to counter that law. In India, let's say, which law will prevail? Central government law will prevail. British Parliament passed a law, New York tried to counter that. So British rulers thought only if New York General Assembly is allowed to exist, it would be able to pass law. So British government told New York General Assembly is suspended. How will you pass a law? But why did New York General Assembly pass a law in the first place? Because they thought they were independent, autonomous. That's why I told you salutary neglect gave them a sense of political autonomy. Now read the first political cause. Defective administration. British government imposed legislations to prevent the colonial legislatures from achieving complete autonomy. So did the people of New York like that? No, they did not. So first problem, New York Restraining Act. Second problem, this William Pitt had a finance minister. We'll end the class with that. William Pitt had a finance minister. Finance minister ka name was Townshend. Finance minister ka name was Townshend. Now Townshend, being the finance minister, passed a new law. It's called Revenue Act of 1767. Revenue Act of 1767, also called as Townshend Tax Project. Townshend Tax Project. Now Revenue Act was to counter the failure of Stamp Act. What was the intention of Stamp Act? To raise money to pay the salary. Stamp Act failed, got repealed. So Revenue Act was to counter the failure of Stamp Act. Sir, only if we ask you to purchase stamped paper, you will resist. But you will be using some commodities which are essential for you, na? Some commodities which are not available in your country. For example, petroleum, let's say. What if the Arab countries increase the price of petroleum? Will we say no? What if Russia increases the price of petroleum? Will we say no? We can't, because we need. So Revenue Act imposed indirect taxes on the colonies. Indirect taxes on the colonies. Meaning, duties on items imported by the colonies was increased. duties on items imported by the colonies was increased. For example, duties on lead, paper, paint, coin metal, glass, and more importantly, tea. The duties on all these imports was increased. William Pitt government also started implementing navigation laws seriously, plus strict implementation of navigation laws was also initiated. Clear? We'll end with that. We'll continue tomorrow. We'll continue tomorrow. If you have a doubt, please ask me tomorrow because I have to go somewhere now. Yeah, if you have a doubt, I'll solve your doubts in the first 10 minutes of the class tomorrow. Shalom. Or if you can't understand the topic without clarifying the doubt, text me in WhatsApp. That's why I told I have to go somewhere.